I woke up from the vibration of my phone, a short trembling sound, as if someone's careful palm touched the glass of the window. The screen was flooded with white, a long text, divided into paragraphs, like paths in a garden after rain. He wrote that he wanted me back, that he would do anything. That I was the axis on which his world revolved. I reread it twice, then a third time, already in a whisper, as if I said it out loud, the words would become heavier and truer. And they became. A taste of iron appeared in my mouth, like from a bitten lip. 7 years is a long stretch of life that we managed to live half inside, half next to. We were polite, knew how to keep quiet, pushed sharp corners under the sofa with our feet, and then we still tripped over them. When you leave, you think for a long time that the main thing has already happened. The door closed, the footsteps melted away in the entrance, echo went silent. But the real main thing comes later, when you put 2 glasses in the kitchen out of habit and pour water only into one. When you catch yourself saying we where it's been I for a long time. When someone writes to you at night and your hand trembles from the one letter I at the beginning of the message. I cried, quietly, burying my forehead in my elbow. Not from happiness and not from grief. From that special mixed feeling when the past suddenly becomes so close, as if it is about to lay its head on your shoulder. I knew. I will answer, but I didn't know. How yes seemed too simple and no too final, as if I cut off something necessary for myself and kept it in a box as a memory. I wrote, "Thank you, this is the warmest letter I have ever received," I cried. But it's more complicated than just going back. We need to talk, and almost immediately added, today, at 6 in the greenhouse of the botanical garden. It's warm there, even in winter. I want to talk with living leaves and not through the glass of the screen. I pressed send and looked at the empty dialogue field for a long time. It looked like a fresh sheet, white, smooth, ready to accept any movement. I love greenhouses for their honesty. The air smells of earth and no one suppresses their own noise. Not a drop on the glass, not ventilation, not leaves that rub against each other from the slightest chill. Inside, the temperature is always the same, and you suddenly understand. Things can be kept if you know how. With people, it's not like that. The heat has to be retuned every time, like a musical instrument that has gone slightly out of tune during the night. Before I went out, I took the long envelope from the top shelf that I had been hiding from myself all this time. Inside was his old notebook, brown imitation leather, soft spine, a round coffee imprint on the cover, like a small moon. I found it when I moved, and then, I remember, the anger stood in my throat like a dry lump. The notebook contained beautiful beginnings and not a single ending. Sketches like inhalations without exhalations. I then decided that this notebook was a symbol of our whole life. We knew how to start. Conversations, plans, small rituals, and were desperately afraid to finish. Maybe that's why we broke up. Someone had to put at least a period. At the bus stop, the frost smelled of iron. I pulled my hat down lower, ran my palms over the scarf, the same one I had once given him. Coffee with milk, into which someone dropped a cloud. We laughed at this name, then as if we ourselves were gourmets from the advertisement, snow crumbs clung to my eyelashes and melted. Barely noticeable cold turned into damp warmth. I caught myself on a strange thought. No matter how this conversation ends, I no longer want to live in the realm of the unsaid. If I have to cut, let it be clean. If I have to sew, let the threads be strong. The greenhouse covered me with warm, damp twilight, and I immediately took off my gloves. I wanted to feel the surfaces with my fingers. The rough bark, the smooth shine of the leaves, the coolness of the metal plates with the names Citrus hinetsu, Philodendron, Alocasia. It sounds as if the plants have their own passports and visas, and we are only a temporary pass into their world. I walked around the circle of cycads, lingered by the pond. The shadows of water lilies froze under the water, like secret letters that you will read in the spring. He came earlier, or I stood too long counting my pulse. When I saw him, I felt my heart first retreat, and then decided to go forward. He was in a gray shirt, without unnecessary theatricality. The face around him was soft, as if the light here knew how to caress people. And yet, in this familiarity, there was anxiety. We know each other as we know an old apartment, where the floor creaks, where the tight handle on the window, where a draft comes from under the windowsill. But the same familiar places can one day become traps. Hello, I said first. I heard my voice. It trembled only half a tone, and that was already a small victory. Hello, he smiled. Thank you for inviting me. We walked along the paths. The damp air clung to my skin, my hair became heavier. I glanced at the signs with the names. It was easier not to fall into his eyes. Familiar to the point of pain, I knew what I would say. Or in any case, I knew where I would start. Because without this, we could not have an honest later, and laters, to be honest, was the only word I wanted now. Not back, not again, but specifically later, where ahead there is room for new reservations and new agreements, only already written down, with signatures, with clauses where everything is taken into account, even our habits of falling silent. I read your letter, I began, and it was beautiful, warm, and painful. You know, it happens when there's a bird inside you that suddenly spreads its wings and presses them against your ribs. It feels cramped. That's how it felt for me. Because we both kept silent about the most important thing all this time. He nodded. There was something in his look that I always loved most, a willingness to listen, without interrupting, without taking over, without mentally adding, as many do, just listen. But a willingness to listen does not mean a willingness to endure, and that was my main concern. I took out the envelope and handed it to him. This is your notebook, I said. I found it when I moved. Then I was terribly angry. At you, at these unfinished texts, at myself for waiting all the time. Now, it seems like an honest metaphor to me. We love to begin, and we're bad at continuing, but if we're going to talk about anything at all today, we need more than just pretty beginnings. He leafed through a couple of pages, smiled crookedly, as if he recognized his own handwriting, but did not remember who exactly the person was who wrote it. At that moment, I wanted to take his hand, not in a conciliatory way, but as a test of communication. Does he hear me? Does he feel my pulse? Does the rhythm match? I did not take it. I stood very straight as people stand when they recount symptoms to a doctor. You wrote more difficult, he reminded softly. Yes, I nodded. Because I didn't leave only you. I left in principle. From the world, from myself, from music, from people. And this is not an excuse, it's the scenery, without which you will see the picture incorrectly. I'll tell you straight, something happened that winter that I didn't tell you about. I held my breath and mechanically ran my thumb over the wrist of my left hand. There was a barely noticeable mark left there, not even a scar, but a thin, paler strip, like a comma left on the wrong page, the mark from the medical bracelet that they put on in the hospital. It rubs the skin if you sleep on your side and then reminds you of itself for a long time, like a thread that they forgot to take out of a seam. I walked around with this mark for a long time then, hiding it under my watch, and I believe that if you can't see it, it's as if it doesn't exist. Stupidity. The invisible also lives and requires space. I didn't say it because I was afraid that I would become a project for you. I said quietly. An item on a list. Fix, protect, save. More than anything in the world, I didn't want to be loved for my brokenness. I thought that if someone saw me whole, only then would it be true, and then I couldn't be whole. He said nothing. He just squeezed the notebook a little, as if he wanted to hold on to the spine so as not to lose his balance. I wanted to finish softly, change the subject, give us both time, but I knew. Every postponed word is like a postponed medicine. Then it will be too late. Sorry for the roundabout approaches, I said. I'm getting to the point, and this is not an accusation, not a request, not a trap. It's a fact without which any "let's try again" would be a fake. I took a deep breath. The air smelled of greenery, warm water, and something lemony, and for the first time in a long time, I said out loud what had previously lived only in my closed drawers. That winter, I said, looking him straight in the eye, I was pregnant. The words hung between us like a damp thread of fog. I was pregnant, I said quietly, but in the greenhouse everything was heard more clearly, even the flutter of a leaf, even a sip. He didn't take a step or a breath, as if his body was still making a schedule of where to put this news so as not to destroy the structure. I saw a familiar tension appear between his eyebrows, the same fold that used to mean, I'll fix everything now. And I had to take the next step myself. It was that winter, I repeated. The time when I had that little concert where you didn't come. I found out 2 days before it. At first there was this funny certainty that the tests were lying, like cheap compliments. Then the doctor, the smell of antiseptic, the air that always seemed a degree colder than it should be, the sheet of paper on the calendar where I circled the date so brightly that it burned through the others. He opened his mouth but closed it, as if he was afraid to devalue the first word that would slip out. I didn't say it, I continued, because I was afraid, and because you said later so much back then. We'll still have time. We have it ahead of us. Not now, it's inconvenient now. I wanted to hide it from your later, like a candle from a draft, and I didn't have the resources to withstand other people's fears when I had more than enough of my own. I faltered. I decided to speak out and the next morning to say it, but the night turned into a long corridor with signs on the doors. I walked down the steps and my knees felt like they belonged to a stranger. The doctor said, unfortunately so calmly, that the word split into two parts, to and regretfully, and fell inside me one after the other. I felt him exhale. This exhalation was not pity, a background happening behind the scenes, but something dull that reached me with warmth. Were you alone? He asked, as if he was walking on thin ice. Yes, I answered. I thought I could handle it, and then I realized that to handle it is also a verb for two. And yet, I decided not to say, at least then, because I knew you would assemble me like a constructor and make a project out of me. Fix, protect, compensate, and I didn't want you to love me as a task, not as a person. I was left with only this trace. I turned my wrist, where the memory lay as a pale strip, and a feeling of emptiness that rang very loudly. It seemed to me that the plants were listening to us too. Drops were flowing from the broad leaves, and each drop seemed like a period in a sentence that we had been putting off for 7 years. It's my fault, he said finally, not because I didn't come to the concert, although that's why too. I'm guilty of that later. I thought it was adulthood, that you have to plan, put off, optimize. That forever is a fragile thing that can't be disturbed, and I constantly chose not to touch, even when I should have touched it. I don't want you to apologize, I said, although I knew that I don't want doesn't cancel out the need. No, that's not true. I want to, but I want you to hear the second part more. More complex is not just about the past, it's about the future. After that winter, I spent a long time fixing myself, and I learned something. He nodded. I'm here. We walked a little further to the citrus section. The air became more astringent, like resentment. The doctor said that I have endometriosis, I said, and felt the word fall heavily to the floor. It's not fatal. You can live, you can play concerts, you can love. But that means that the scenario about children later someday is written in the fantasy genre. Perhaps it will be possible? I swallowed. Perhaps not. Perhaps a long journey in medicine. Perhaps never. I said maybe so many times that it lost its form and became just a sound. He took a step closer, not intruding, but offering a shoulder to fall on. It doesn't change how he began. Stop. I stopped. I haven't finished. This is one part. The second, I'm leaving, I was accepted to the musical residency. For a year, I really wanted it. It seemed to me that if I learned to be alone in another city, where everything smells different, I will become whole again without seams I wasn't going to tell you. We were already after, then, and now. Here I am flying in a month. He nodded again, but this time the nod meant rethinking the whole route plan. And that's not all, I said, and for the first time in the entire conversation, I smiled, not to soften, but from my own unexpected honesty. I don't know if I want children. Maybe wanting is a luxury I haven't allowed myself. Maybe not wanting is my precision. In therapy, I'm learning not to confuse other people's dreams with my own. And now I can't promise you the version of the future that we once mentally signed. I can only promise honesty. And even then, not forever, but for now I remember in detail how it's done. He was silent, but in this silence there was movement. You could see the shadows of thought passing across his face. Fear, guilt, the desire to embrace us right now, then caution, then some new thing that doesn't yet have a name. I love you, he said calmly, as if it were a statement. I'm scared, and I'm ashamed, and I'm glad that you're talking, and it hurts, and I don't know which shore to moor this boat to, but I'm here. I know, I replied. I'm here too. It's just that now, here means more to us than it used to. We walked around and returned to the pond. Somewhere up the steel stairs, someone slipped and cursed under his breath. The living world reminded me of itself. I looked at him, at his shirt, at the familiar line of his chin, at that spot by his right eye where a smile always hides if he holds it back. And I realized that all this cannot be treated like porcelain. It's scary to touch. It will break, no. This is something that has already survived one winter, so it will withstand a touch. I have a favor to ask, I said. Don't promise me anything today. Don't say, I'll improve. I will. I will forever. Just say that you'll come to my small hall on Friday. I'm playing a quartet, there won't be many people. At 19:10, you'll just stand by the door. If you're there, we'll continue the conversation. If you're not there, you and I will at least have a beautiful, honest point. He smiled, a little lost and very genuine. I'll come, he said. Okay, I nodded. Then see you on Friday. I handed him an envelope with a notebook. Take it, and if you suddenly want, finish at least one story there. Any not for me, for yourself. It seems to me that you are so afraid of dots that your pencil broke. He took the notebook as if it were something alive that could bite if held incorrectly. We said goodbye with a nod, no hugs. I walked out of the greenhouse into the frost, and the cold hit my face so sharply that I cried for a second, not understanding why exactly. And then I walked to the bus stop, counting my steps like notes. I was rehearsing a new play last night, and I found myself, for the first time in a long time, not afraid of the next step, because I can see it. A door, 1910, warm light, a scarf unbuttoning, and someone who will either come in or not. And when the lights went out in the hall on Friday and the musicians played the first notes, I heard the front door open. The stage is small, like a kitchen table. It's always cramped, but every sound is like a spoon on the edge of a cup. I love this hall for the honesty of the acoustics. Here you can't hide a mistake behind reverberation, like an awkward pause, behind laughter. At 1909, I felt a bird moving inside me, spreading its wings and resting against my ribs. At 1910, the door really opened. I didn't turn my head. I was afraid to ruin the music, but I felt with my skin. He came. I just knew, like you know that the kettle has boiled. Without looking at the indicator, I played better than I rehearsed. Not because I was trying to impress, because some new, hitherto unfamiliar detail worked in me, which held the tempo, the breath, the meaning. When we finished, the audience applauded exactly as much as December and Friday allow. Sincerely, but without unnecessary loudness, I nodded to the musicians, put the instrument down, and went out into the corridor where it always smells of wet jackets and coffee from a machine. He stood by the door, scarf pulled off, cheeks red. Frost had grabbed hold of him on the way. In his hands was my envelope. No, not mine anymore. A notebook peeked out from a half-open flap on top. Hello, he said. His voice was a little hoarse, like that of people who have been silent for a long time. Hello, I replied. You've arrived. Yes, he nodded. And he picked up the notebook. I finished writing something. We found an empty dressing room, lamps around the mirror, old posters on the walls, boxes with wires. It was warm inside in a theatrical way, unevenly distributed, with hot spots. He put the notebook on the table and opened it about halfway. My phrase from the past, we bought a green vase at a secondhand store similar to a bottle of Coca-Cola, and behind it, in neat handwriting, was written, and put eucalyptus branches there, which no longer smelled as strongly as in the store, but still served as a faithful reminder that even what is brought home does not lose its origin. A week later, we finally threw out the wilted leaves and for the first time did not quarrel in the kitchen because of, "Why didn't you do it?" I then thought, perhaps being together is, first of all, finishing small things. Not heroic, at the end, a period, not an ellipsis, not a dash. A period, small, black, confident. "I don't know," he said, "if I can write like this forever." But I realized what I was afraid of. Not forever, but responsibility for the little now. It requires hands and breath and time, which you can't take out of your pocket if you haven't put it there beforehand. I sat on the edge of the chair and looked at him the way one looks at a person who has brought bread into the house. Simple with a hard crust. Nothing festive, but very necessary. "I didn't bring your later to execution," I said. "I brought my now. It consists of therapy on Wednesdays, a ticket in a month, a possible operation in the summer, and not understanding what I want from the word family. And also music, and the fact that I don't want to play the role of project, even if the project has kind hands. Can I hang around while you figure this out?" He said it not as a request for a position, but as an offer to stay on the stairs while I went down. "You can," I answered after a short pause. "But let's try without these." I showed quotation marks in the air, forever to prove it. "Let's make a contract. Specific, without bombastic promises." He sat down opposite, his chin shaking slightly. This happens to him when he is nervous and trying not to give it away. I opened the notebook to a blank page. "Point 1, I said and smiled to myself. "It's funny, of course, to write a contract in the dressing room. We call things by their proper names. If I'm scared, I say I'm scared. If you're tired, you say I'm tired and don't turn into silence." Point 2, he picked up. "We come to concerts, to the doctor, to important things, the Sunday market, morning coffee, to sit in silence. If we can't, we tell you in advance. We don't promise the impossible." Point 3, I said, "Children and everything around us. We don't make decisions out of fear of losing each other. We leave this topic as a field that can be touched, but cannot be plowed alone. And, no later, as an excuse. Only now we feel this way, and after some time, we check the map again." Point 4. He tapped his finger on the paper. "Letters. 1 letter to each other a week. Real ones by hand without poetry if it doesn't work. Just a report on what hurts, what makes you happy, what irritates you. So as not to accumulate. 5th, I said, if I can't stand it and want to hide, you won't break the door. Knock and leave, I'll go out myself. 6th, he added quietly, if I start living in later again, you'll say stop, and I'll have the right to stop and rebuild and not stubbornly drag on." We both chuckled. The agreement was not romantic, but very lively. I remembered about the residence and felt my chest tighten. "I'm leaving for a year," I reminded. "We'll be far away. Your coming will become literally impossible." "Then I'll come to the screen," he said, "and to the mail." He raised his notebook, "and to these letters, and to the airport, when I can. And if I can't, I'll say I can't." Not as an excuse. As a fact, I nodded. I wanted to believe. And for the first time in a long time, I didn't force myself to believe 100%. Percentage in love is a mathematical illusion. We are not in a bank. He walked me home, without entering, without hugging me in the entryway, like in the movies. He just walked next to me, matching my stride, without speeding up or slowing down. The snow rustled under my boots. On a bench by the entryway, someone was discussing these prices. Cigarette smoke curled in the air like a musical staff without notes. As we parted, he said, "I'll be at the crockery store on Sunday. I want to buy plates without chips, just because I've had enough of living like I'm in a rented apartment." And that was the most beautiful thing he could say. That night, I lay in the dark for a long time and listened to my own breathing. I thought about the future, not as a single picture, but as many small pictures that add up to a film. In one, he and I are cooking soup in a new pot. In another, we quarrel over a trifle, but we don't go into the fog. In a third, I return from the airport, and the hallway smells of his sweater and oranges. In a fourth, there are children, and we learn to breathe along with their nightly cries. In a fifth, there are no children, and we still build a house. From books, friends, music, morning jokes. All these films do not contradict each other. They are about how you can. The next day, the first letter arrived short. Today, I was thinking about the word trust. It comes from the verb to believe, but with the prefix to believe until to the end. To the point I don't know how it happened right away, but I know that I want. I choose to get to know you again and myself too. I put the envelope on the table and realized that I could drink tea again, not out of habit, but because it was warm not only outside the time before the flight became strange, it stretched out like chewing gum and flew by at the same time. We met several times. Sometimes we walked, sometimes we just sat in the kitchen and listened to the snow outside the window turning the world into an amorphous light. One time he came with a box. It contained white plates, 2 bowls, 2 glasses. For the time before, he said, and for the time after, if it happens. I caught myself not being afraid of this if. I nodded. That's how it should be. If should live nearby, like a neighbor you greet on the stairs. A week before the flight, he suggested, let's play one truth, the most terrible one in turn on the last day. I agreed, not for the sake of the game, but for the sake of training the heart. We set the day and place, the same small bar where my concert, which he didn't come to, once took place. The circle closed but without a black marker, with a soft pencil. We arrived on time. The bar smelled of burnt sugar and damp wood. He sat down opposite, put his hands on the table. My truth, he said, I wasn't afraid of forever. I was afraid of being bad, now. I was always trying on the role of the ideal, and from this trying on, I couldn't move. I looked like a mannequin. I was comfortable, but not alive. And I didn't come to your concert then. Not because I was tired, because I was afraid to see you alive, and myself next to you. It's shameful. I'm ashamed, I nodded. It was a good shame, warm as a wool blanket. It covers, but doesn't press. It's true, I said. I often called my freedom what was actually the fear of being needed. I left first so that I wouldn't be abandoned. I kept quiet because I considered emotions a weakness, and I didn't tell you about the pregnancy not only because I didn't want to be a project. I wanted to prove, to myself, not to you, that I could handle it myself. It turned out that it wasn't necessary. We both fell silent. The music from the speaker changed to something recognizable, old jazz like warm water. I looked at my watch. In 7 days, I'll leave. In 7 days, all this will be transferred to screens, letters, airports, and I became afraid real, pure fear without embellishments. Let's not make promises, I said. Let's do something small, and if by the time I leave we manage not to destroy it, I smiled. I'll leave you the key to my paper mailbox, and you'll rustle envelopes like snow, and I will too. Agreed on, he smiled, this time with that same smile that hid behind his eye. And, can I learn a lesson from you? He raised his notebook. Put dots. We can, I said, but we won't put periods in our sentences. On the eve of my flight, we met again, just to be silent next to each other. He told me that he had found a book for me to take with me on the road. Stories about cities where there are smells instead of names. I laughed. This is just my thing. We stood on the porch of the entrance and listened to the snow crumbling under the truck. At some point, I said, I have one more request. Don't come to the airport. Not because I don't want to see you, because goodbyes are my weakest spots. I blur there. I want to leave in a straight line, not smeared. Send a letter and that's it. And we'll meet there, where we can say hello without bye. He nodded. As I was leaving, I looked back. He stood there like a pillar of light. He didn't call, he didn't follow, and I felt calm. And then the day of departure came and I opened his letter right in the queue at passport control. I won't be coming to the airport, it read, like you asked, but I bought white plates and they're waiting. And another thing, in your kitchen on the refrigerator, I left a list, not a spell, not a plan, not a promise. 5 things to do before 5 things to do after. Do what you can, the rest I'll hold. The paper was thick, the ink was dark blue, like the evening I smiled right in line. The woman in front of me looked back and smiled back at me as if we knew each other. The plane took off easily like a thought that was finally resolved. In the window, the city became French fries, straight lines, yellow squares, and suddenly a black river. I closed my eyes and imagined our greenhouse. Warm, humid air, drops, water lilies, and two figures who had finally learned to speak. I didn't know where this would lead, but I knew. Now we have a language in which we understand what we want to say, even if sometimes we stumble. The first weeks in a new city smelled of dust, like a library, strange streets, local words that you have to put in your mouth correctly so as not to offend the sound. I went to rehearsals, got used to the studio, slept little, but slept soundly, as if the springs inside me had stopped straining. Letters flew back and forth. His were neat, sometimes funny. Mine were long, sometimes too long. He wrote about soup on new plates, about how he was learning not to invent for me what I thought. I wrote about a city where in the evenings the windows smelled of roasted chestnuts and river water, about a neighbor who watered her cactus every morning as if it were a delicate tropical plant. One day, I found a photo in an envelope, a white plate with two apples on it. On the back, sometimes family is two apples on one plate. The rest is nuance. I laughed and cried at the same time. That same day, I sent him my photo, a studio window with me in the reflection holding an instrument and a small paper bird in my palm that I had folded during a breathing technique class. Sometimes I is a bird that has finally found a place to spread its wings. He replied, "Take care of your ribs." In April, I was scheduled for surgery, a small but unpleasant one. The doctor spoke confidently like a bus driver on a familiar route. I wiped the sweat from my palm, exhaled, and wrote to him. "I'll be in the hospital for a day." He answered immediately, "I'm here." I mean, as close as possible, on the phone, in the letter, in my head. After the surgery, I woke up, felt the weight of the blanket and a strange light space inside, like after they pulled out a splinter that had seemed like a natural part of my finger for so many years. There was a note on the nightstand next to me, a nurse's hand. "Your friend brought a package. Food and a letter." The package contained clear applesauce, baby water, socks with lemons, and an envelope. "I really want to be with you now," he wrote, "but I can't. This feeling is like a new muscle. It aches, but it works. I'll stay in the doorway. You'll let me in yourself when you want." I burst into tears. Beautiful, like in a movie. No, ugly with a nose, with spots, because it was alive. Spring in the new city smelled of damp dust and bread. I learned not to be afraid of the voices in my head that used to break into screams. Therapy, it turns out, is like scales. Not much of an art, but if you play them honestly, your hearing becomes more accurate. We argued with him. Yes, even at a distance. Because of little things. He was late with a letter. I did not answer the phone. We were offended not because I did not love, because we were alive, but we learned not to leave for the fog. "I was offended," he wrote. "I am jealous of your courage." I wrote, "I am afraid that I will lose." He admitted, "I am afraid that I will dissolve." I admitted. We spoke as we taught ourselves, without screaming, but with heart. In the summer he came. No surprises. We agreed on dates, ticket prices, schedules. We didn't make a scene at the airport, we just found each other with our eyes. My city shook him up. There's a different sun here, it's lower, and the water in the river doesn't carry reflections but rather swallows them. We walked along the embankment. I showed him the store where I buy my simplest joys: bread, olives, funny postcards with ducks. He listened. In the evening, we sat on the windowsill and were silent, and I didn't have to think what to be silent about. We didn't come back, we were. At some point, he said, "I keep thinking about children." Not as a program, but as an opportunity, I realized I want to be a father. Not because it's necessary, but because it's one of the forms of giving. If it works out, I'll be glad. If not, I'll be glad that I have hands that can hold you, and friends, and the world, and plates. "I keep thinking," I answered, "that mama is a word that I tried on with someone else's hands. It was tight for me. It hurts. Now it doesn't fit. Maybe later, maybe not." I don't promise to love a word that I don't have the key to yet, but I promise not to hate it in advance, and not to run away if one day it suddenly fits comfortably inside me. He nodded, and suddenly, not like a hero, but like a man, he began to cry quietly. I was always afraid that I would lose you, he said, wiping his cheeks with his palms. And now I'm still afraid, but in a different way. Fear lives with joy, like a neighbor, I can live with it. I put my hand on the back of his head, the way you calm a bird that has entered a room, not pressing down so as not to break a wing, but creating a space in which it will find a window itself. We lived 10 days like a pocket life. It contained a movie on an old screen, a line for ice cream, a boring argument over who didn't turn off the light, conversations until the night, 2 pillows smashed in the morning, a note on the refrigerator, buy basil, don't confuse it with mint. Nothing fancy and very much everything. On the last day, he took a notebook out of his backpack. On the bookmark was a piece of paper with the title N number 2. I smiled. His dots were multiplying. Will you read it? He asked. I'll read it, I nodded. The text was short, about a small kitchen where there was never enough space, and how we masterfully learned not to clean up crumbs, but simply share them, about how sometimes the most correct together is when everyone has their own chair and their own mug, but a common teapot at the end, a period and a postscript, and sometimes a comma so that there is something to continue. We walked him to the airport together. I learned to tolerate these spaces where everything hangs and waits for new coordinates. The departure area smelled of vanilla and fuel. We stood hugging and did not invent words. Right, he said, right, I said, and he went behind the glass, into a world where people become pixels, and then airplanes. Autumn came unnoticed. I finished my residency, packed my bags. In the city, the leaves quickly turned brown, like bread in a toaster. I was walking home from the last rehearsal and caught a clear state in myself. I no longer need to hide invisible drafts, I know how. To open a window when it's stuffy and close it when it's cold. A thick envelope was waiting for me at the post office. Inside was the same list from my refrigerator. 5 things to do before, 5 things to do after. At the top were ticked off. Buy plates, done. Learn to put periods for in progress. Come on Friday at 7:10 p.m., done. Don't get bogged down in later, remind again and again. Stay, every day. At the bottom were after, meet you at the airport if you don't mind. Cook soup, buy flowers, not as a sign of guilt, but as a sign of I'm glad. Write N number 3, continue. I laughed and sent him a text message. I won't mind in soup, yes. The plane home was early, I didn't sleep. I read the list over and over like a prayer. At the airport, I was met by a familiar smell. Coffee, damp metal, warm air at the exit. He stood with a bouquet, eucalyptus and rosemary. They didn't smell like in a store. Quieter, more honest. We hugged, not like in a movie, like people who know how many bones are in me and where they are fragile. I realized that we don't have fireworks and we don't need them. We have a sequence of movements at home in the kitchen. He put 2 white plates on the table on one, 2 apples on the other, lemons on the socks that he brought to the hospital, a funny frozen light. We ate the soup slowly as if we were learning all over again. He took out a notebook and opened it to a new page, N number 3. I read, we returned home, not to where we lived, but to where we can talk. The door was not slammed, but held. The dishes clinked quietly. We never promised we did it today. Period. I smiled and taking a pen finished writing. And sometimes it's not the end. Sometimes it's the beginning, in which it's not scary to put periods, because you can always put the next line. We didn't get married tomorrow, didn't have children the day after tomorrow, didn't become perfect. We left an honest relief in history. We learned to show up on Friday at 7:10 p.m. We learned to leave without slamming the door. We learned to come back without promises and do the little now so thoroughly that later stops seeming like a mythical beast. A month later, we went to the botanical garden again. The greenhouse greeted us with a familiar air, earth, lemongrass, warm water. Drops flowed down the glass and shimmered like little signs. We stood by the pond, where water lilies freeze under the water like secret letters, and I said, "You know I don't hide the mark from the bracelet anymore." It's like a scar from a fallen childhood, proof that I lived and will live. And I don't hide my fear anymore, he replied. It's like a neighbor. Sometimes it makes noise. I go out and say, "Quieter, please," and it shuts up. We stood next to each other. Next to each other is not so close that it's hard to breathe, and not so far that it's hard to hear. Next to each other is when your pulse doesn't try to match mine, and we both find a common rhythm like in an ensemble. And I suddenly saw clearly, our home is not a loft, not a mortgage, not a forever residence permit. Our home is the language we speak, and that notebook where the dots appear and two white plates on which sometimes apples lie and sometimes lemons in socks. We left the greenhouse into the frost and the cold hit our faces. I inhaled and felt my chest was free, and in my pocket, a letter has not yet been written this week. It will be about the silence in which it is not scary. About music that is not hidden behind the volume about us, who have not forever, but today. And this perhaps is the greatest forever that is given to us. I took his hand, simply without drama. He responded with his fingers, softly like holding something alive. We walked along the path where the sign said philodendron and alocasia, and I caught myself laughing lightly. A passport for plants, a visa for people. And we were just two dots between which a line suddenly appeared, and this line was enough to walk. And if I ever have to choose between later and now, I will remember this air, this water, and this hand. And I will choose to speak because this is our common home.